Hey guys, it's Quinn, and today we're going to be doing one of the more hotly debated categories to rank the top 10 James Bond title sequences. Serving initially as simply a normal credit roll, the title sequences have evolved into sort of miniature films of their own, showcasing themes from the film, nudity, silhouettes, creative cinematography, and at times even serving as part of the plot. Although the overall quality of the title sequences have improved with technology, even Dr. No and From Russia with Love over 50 years ago have the similar charm that Skyfall and Spectre have, not to mention all the ones in between. I will be ranking these based on their creativity, how the visuals interact with the music, how they segue with the rest of the film, and of course, what they do with the titles. Obviously, the intros and outros in the sequence are also important as well. The theme songs themselves are a separate list and will not be a factor here. With that, let's do some dishonorable mentions. The Man with the Golden Gun, You Only Live Twice are extremely subpar title sequences that are low quality, not unique at all, and just generally feel lazy. Both play on Asian themes and really nothing else, and in every way that You Only Live Twice just shows volcanoes and bowing women for 3 minutes, The Man with the Golden Gun spends half of its time just playing around with water as a straight shot of a golden gun just stands there. They are generally weak, and honestly I think that the same can be said for the films they belong to as well. I do want to quickly address For Your Eyes Only because of how it has the singer of the song in the actual video. I really like it. Although on one hand it is stupid to turn the credits into a literal music video, it seemed oddly appropriate in this case. In terms of Roger Moore films, For Your Eyes Only is unique, and so it doesn't shock me that they would try something different in a title sequence here, especially with a song that emphasizes the singer so much. I think that this was a fun, bold move, even if it can be a little distracting. With that, on to number 10. Number 10, A View to a Kill. I have a soft spot for this one, I'll be honest. A View to a Kill is famously one of the more dated Bond films, and it's never more present than in this title sequence. But this entire film plays a lot off the feel of the 1980s, and I really like how they pulled out all the stops to give it that 80s flavor. The combination of skiing, which is something we see in a lot of cheesier 80s films, and a lot of Bond films actually, is finally incorporated in a large way here. I also like the use of neon. It's dated, but it is unique, and I really like how boldly they use it. In terms of how it combines with the theme song, I really think that it enhances what is already a great theme. Particularly, I love the combination of Bond shooting the gun in the middle with the climax of the song midway through. Of every title sequence in the series, this was the best matchup right here. They replicated in Quantum of Solace with Bond shooting a bolt at the beginning of the sequence, but it feels much more clever here. What drags this sequence down is that, admittedly, it does just play back to showing silhouettes of women, and as we'll see, that is a common theme in most of these. This one just adds its own flair with neon playing around with ice and fire and wrapping in the theme song very well. Number 9, Tomorrow Never Dies. This one gets bagged on, mainly because it literally looks dry. Although it may not be the most relaxing visuals in the series, especially when we compare it to its follower in the form of The World's Not Enough, which just shows oil flowing for 3 minutes, I think that how it integrates the news media into the sequence is clever as hell. I could point to pretty much any part of the sequence, seeing as it is all about Carver's Media Group, but there are two I want to highlight. First, I really like how they include X-ray vision throughout much of the sequence. At risk of sounding pretentious, a lot of this film is about Bond looking inside the operations of a news media and seeing its corruption. Similarly, throughout the sequence, we see what would appear to be a beautiful, harmless girl, but underneath they are all carrying guns, knives, etc. We see the inside mechanisms of a gun and computer, which I think is really cool in how it keeps with the theme of intricacies that lie beneath a seemingly innocent enough event. My second favorite moment is at the end. I absolutely love how the diamond necklace that we see on Carver's wife throughout the film turns into diamonds around a planet, very similar to how satellites, fly around the world. And as the woman standing on one of these diamonds jumps to destroy a large screen beneath her, the parallels to how Carver's wife sacrifices herself so that Bond can destroy the media mogul is a fucking brilliant foreshadowing. Definitely more nuanced than when Jaws falls on a tent to start out the Moonraker sequence. Number 8, Spectre. I'll concede this one is a little bit of an orgy, but it feels like if we combine On Her Majesty's Secret Service and Goldfinger. What we see in this sequence is a great throwback to pretty much the entire Craig era through visuals on pieces of glass, which I think is a nice ode to how On Her Majesty's Secret Service showed Connery films through a time glass. It may not be the most clever idea, and I think that the foreshadowing is a bit too blatantly obvious, but I like what they're at least shooting for here. On second viewing, it is very obvious that this title sequence is pretty much just a summary of the film, which, spoiler alert, is that Spectre is responsible for pretty much everything bad in the Craig era. In that way, this title sequence, takes a risk. Unlike Skyfall, where you really could not predict anything from the title sequence except that a house is involved, you can make a solid guess from the sequence that every villain and every death are linked, which are only supposed to find out at the end of the film. And this is where I want to talk about the transitions into and out of the title sequences. What we see is an instant balls to the walls on both sides of the sequence, with action and plot instantly becoming relevant. I think that this is important because it doesn't allow you time to ponder much on what happens in the title sequence itself at that moment. If you had the intro and outro of, say, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is just Bond walking around for 5 minutes, then as a viewer you could sit there and chew on the title sequence. In Spectre, you cannot do that because of the action that goes on. So the influence it has over the plot is there, but it isn't overbearing. It's something that you're going to catch in the moment. Besides that, I think that there is nothing else too noticeable to mention. The visuals are fucking fantastic, but that's more because it was made this decade instead of in the 60s, so to give it disproportionate props I think would be unfair, and that goes for a lot of the Craig era as well. Still though, the use of the octopus was cool. Now, why did I mention and compare this to Goldfinger? Well, every fucking thing in this is gold, which I really like because it plays right into how Bond is staring at a gold ring going into the title sequence. It plays off of that super well. I think you guys get my point here. The sequence plays to the film and the transitions very well. Let's move on. Number 7, Dr. No. I don't have much to say on this one because it is easily the simplest title sequence in the series, but I think that is part of its overall charm. It's not too bombastic, it's clearly on the lower end of the budget, but it oddly works here. Specifically, it introduces the official James Bond theme here in a fantastic way. Although we hear this theme again in From Russia with Love, Dr. No is the only title sequence to really utilize the song to such an extent, and how it plays with the moving dots is something we obviously will never see again. There isn't really any nuances here, it isn't shockingly creative, but it's got almost a late 50s cool to it, which is an era I feel like we only really got a taste of in Dr. No. The rest of the sequence is kind of stupid with the 3 blind mice, and the dance routine felt like a psychedelic nightmare fitting for a Beatles music video, but hell, this film as a whole is kind of a clusterfuck, so it works. The reason this makes the number 7 spot is because Dr. No could have easily just done a roll credit at the end and not really given a shit, but instead, it set in motion a now pivotal part of the film for decades to come, and for that, credit is deserved. Plus, it is badass in its own way. Number 6, Goldfinger. The quintessential theme song in the series is paired with probably the most famous title sequence as well. Although Goldfinger is not the founder of Silhouetted Women in the series, that title going to From Russia with Love, it does it in its modern form, with the women being separate from the titles themselves. I really like how they have the clips of the film used here as well. Is it that creative? No, you're just cutting and pasting footage, but the clips that are used are really quite great. It starts and ends with Goldfinger and then shows a bunch of crazy shit to come. And by having all these images wedged between a literal image of Goldfinger is a clear indication that this guy causes mayhem. In the same way that the theme song of Thunderball shows that number 2 is batshit crazy, the title sequence does that here. Plus, the women themselves pop out more than pretty much any in the series because they're painted gold. The one drawback for me is the use of the clips from Russia with Love near the end of the sequence. That laziness held this sequence back for me. Number 5, Goldeneye. This is a cool one for sure. Right from the get-go, I love the use of an explosion out of a gun barrel as a transition into the title sequence. It's stylish, and the sound from the gun matches absolutely perfectly with the song itself. It's very similar to what A View to a Kill did. What is unique to the sequence is how it brilliantly takes advantage of the real world around it. In every other title sequence, although you could tell what era it was from based off of the technology, you really couldn't pinpoint a date. Here, GoldenEye perfectly places itself in the mid-90s through its use of communist monuments and having them destroyed. For a series based entirely on the Cold War era, being so brazen and showing communism's irrelevance to modern-day society was really cool to see. It allowed for unique shots, my personal favorite being the hammer and sickle, being just so graciously broken into 2 or 3 pieces. This is all important to note because the Cold War is what allows the pre-title sequence to happen. That's what the pre-title sequence is about. And showing it ending through the title sequence was a perfect segue into the post-war society Bond faces for the rest of the film. Speaking of great transitions, I can never get enough of how the gun barrel ends in the very gun barrel that it started. Could argue that's a metaphor that Bond and his PPK haven't changed throughout the years, hence why they show the same gun, but that's a stupid debate for another time. Number 4, Skyfall. Perhaps the most complicated title sequence in this series, this one gets exceptional props for how it teases the entire film without actually giving anything away. Unlike Spectre, where you could make some solid guesses as to what would happen because of the title sequence, Skyfall brilliantly uses sets from throughout the film to create its own little narrative here. I love how they show the house and graves, especially in coordination to M and Bond. It's the kind of throw-out to a plot in the sequence that I don't think will be done in such a nuanced way for a long time to come. I also want to give a particular mention to how well it transfers in from the pre-title sequence. Using water and an injured Bond from the pre-title sequence into the title sequence was something that should have been done in a film like You Only Live Twice, for instance, but it was actually executed here and executed well. One final thing before we move on is how there's a part when Bond is shooting various shadows of himself, and the only one who fails to kill is a shadow that turns into the villain Silva. It's very clever in how it shows how these two are actually very similar, and that this alter ego in Bond is a part that actually does exist. Okay, let's get this show rolling. I think you guys get the point. Number 3, From Russia with Love. I personally find From Russia with Love to be the absolute best example in the series of the title sequence using silhouetted women. In every other title sequence, including Goldfinger, which uses women, they are always in the background as a distraction while the titles fly by. Obviously, there is some interaction. For example, Octopussy, which does it incredibly uncomfortably, but what sets Russia apart is the entire sequence plays with the interactions between the women and the credits. Sure, sometimes you cannot really read them that well, but I think that is more than outweighed by how smooth this entire sequence is. It plays with the gypsy scene later in the film is really a nice little touch. And this is the only time in the series where the credits themselves look awesome. Plus, the sequence fits so damn well with the theme song. As a classic title sequence, Russia is easily the best. There are just 2 in front of it that are so unique that not even the classic model can beat it out. And with that, number 2, The Spy Who Loved Me. Is it the best display of technology? Oh, no. Is it as slick as From Russia with Love? Definitely fucking not. But The Spy Who Loved Me is so smart in how it uses the actual Bond actor for the first time in the series and the interaction he has with Cold War figures. Up until this point, a Bond actor has never been in the flesh in the title sequence. Having it appear here was brilliant. The Bond series had hit a sort of rough patch at the time, so this film went back to basics and really focused on its Cold War roots. Because of that, what we get was a fantastic parallel between Bond and the future Bond girl XXX, who is a Soviet. But instead of going crazy with Soviet shit like GoldenEye, we have extremely simple lighting with subtle shots that play into the grand metaphor of Bond and XXX's relationship. You see throughout the film, just like in the title sequence, that the two have a complex relationship that is overshadowed by the simple fact that they are part of opposite alliances. In the title sequence, in one shot, Bond is hugging her and defending her, whereas in the very next, you see him simply shove over a bunch of female Soviet replicas, which probably is my favorite part of the sequence. All the while, one simple light that constantly switches colors overshadows the entire sequence, like how the Cold War overshadows the entire relationship between the two. It's sweet, it's really imaginative, and there's a lot to unpack here, more so than I even did here, which makes it a part of the film you really want to watch instead of simply skip over. Number 1, Casino Royale. I think of every list I've ever done, this might be one of the most definitive answers for my number one choice. And you must remember, I'm really not a huge fan of this film, but the title sequence of Casino Royale is nothing short of brilliant. First of all, the use of playing cards and the 4 card types as symbols throughout the sequence was so out of the ordinary, yet so obvious for this film. Hell, who plays poker more than Bond? But that is an easy takeaway from what is a really smart and intricate sequence. First of all, and most significantly, this I believe is the first time in the series where there's no females really in the sequence, which was incredibly refreshing for a film that is all about reinventing the character. It isn't about the escapism in the sequence, it's the battles he must face. First, it's against the very silhouetted men. Then, it's the love interest in the form of Vesper, who we get a brilliant little cameo of right here. And then, at the end of Bond becoming 007. I think for me, what brings this to the top is the ending of the sequence. Although some endings of sequences have been done very well, i.e. Goldfinger, Tomorrow Never Dies, and Skyfall, this one here is so badass precisely because of how simple it is. It's a fresh 007 walking towards the screen. That's it. In a sequence which is so complicated in its visuals, yet simple in its story, this final shot of Craig is such a great way to cap off the sequence that this sequence can't be beat. This sequence starts with what I must emphasize is by far the best opening shot in the series, by Bond shooting into a gun barrel to become 007, and it ends with him owning the role completely. What else could you want out of a 3-minute segment that's designed entirely to show a little title crawl? Because of that absolute awesomeness, Casino Royale is number 1, hands down. So what's your guys' favorite title sequence? Am I being mean in bagging on Quantum of Solace yet again? Whatever it may be, leave in the comments section below. I apologize for having a little hiatus in videos, but I'll keep making them as ideas come in anyways. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Ciao.